Do you like to have your brain melted? I think there might be a glitch in the Matrix because Apple TV's Constellation shows you what happens if you mix Schrödinger with a sci-fi cosmic horror mystery. So grab some aspirin, let's dive in. Jo is an astronaut who returns to Earth after a disaster in space, only to discover that key pieces of her life seem to be missing. So Constellation is an 8-episode series that's going to require you to stick it out if you want to find any sort of enjoyment. And that's not because the show is boring or slow, it's thrilling and intriguing, but it's also wildly complex and tells the story through convoluted visions, flashbacks, and timelines. So you have to take it all in, otherwise you'll be both lost and disappointed. Now I've got Noomi Rapace as Jo, an astronaut aboard the ISS when calamity strikes. And after she finally returns to Earth, things go absolutely mental as Jo finds she's come back to a world that's not quite right. Rapace is wonderful in this, fully diving into a persona that is grief-stricken and confidently confused at the events playing out in her life. She's strong and sympathetic, but also fully invests in the unreliable narrator role. Now, I loved the absolute perplexity that she continually experiences. She's consistently trying to put the puzzle pieces together, but the pieces keep shifting, so the picture is continually different. Now, we get to go on that ride, and it is fun. Jonathan Banks also stars in this, and he's just as committed as Rapace is to her role. There are a lot of intricacies to his character, causing him to have to play out different facets of emotions. Now, this especially becomes true in the latter half of the series, and his emotional cues help to inform where we are at in terms of perception. And then 3 other standouts are Rosie and Davina Coleman, and then James Darcy. They play Jo's daughter and husband, and they get the responsibility of carrying the majority of the emotional heft of this narrative. There are definite times when my heart broke for them, and of course their experiences. Now, both Colemans have an even tougher role, and they masterfully carry it out, giving their character resolve and strength, even amidst terrible mental strain. Now, the writing in the show is intelligent, and I mean, it has to be so it doesn't get all turned on itself and then end up with massive inconsistencies and plot holes. But intelligent doesn't mean not understandable. The plot divulges large amounts of details, which then helps to make it all very mysterious. And even though the storyline is smart, there are occasional lines of dialogue that do feel dumbed down. Now, thankfully, this wasn't the norm, so those minor hiccups in the scripting, they're forgivable. Now, I liken this series a bit to Primer. The answers were right there, but as they were pieced together, my brain began to just fall out of my head. And I love when a series or movies can hurt my head and then make me think. I mean, I become fully invested so that all distractions disappear and I have to focus solely on the narrative that's being presented. This is one of those shows that it has a ton of those blink or you miss it type of scenes. Some are short and the transitions are seamless, even between timelines. So to get the most out of this, you definitely want to be able to watch without distractions. Now, there are some clues to what could be going on if you focus on Jo's daughter and her stuffed animal. Now, these aren't outright story spoilers, nor where they give you a ton of answers, but it may help just a bit in keeping your brain from coming out of your ears. Now, something I thought was really cool, but won't give you any answers to what's going on, is that there is a conversation that Jo and her daughter have about a voice that's heard. Now, this gets some inspiration from a recording on the real-life golden record that was sent out into space on Voyagers 1 and 2. Now, again, other than name recognition, this doesn't serve much in the storytelling, but I did think it was cool. Now, some story elements feel almost forgotten if you're watching week to week. Fortunately, though, they do come back around, so we're not left hanging. There's a vision that Jo sees while on the ISS in episode 1, and this is addressed in tiny spurts in a few of the episodes. And while it is a hugely important aspect of the plot, it can feel like it's just an insertion meant to amp up the intrigue without driving the story forward. Now, I thought the space footage was handled really well, giving a lot of realism and believability to both the spacewalks and everything that takes place within the ISS. I mean, even the way we see blood flow or fire behave, it feels how I imagine it would behave in zero gravity. The effects, they're outstanding and are on par with so many of the other Apple originals. There are also some gnarly bits of imagery, and the makeup and effects used to accomplish these visuals, they looked flawless. Sometimes the storylines can feel scattered, and that's mainly because we jump between the present and flashbacks without any noticeable transition. We're forced to use contextual clues to figure out where we are in the timeline. And while that's not overly problematic, it could be a hindrance for some. There's also a little vagueness surrounding the MacGuffin that creates the entire story situation. I mean, enough info is given to get an understanding, but for those who are looking for a full-on explanation and detailed analysis of how things work, we don't get that level of breakdown. And I don't think this is very detrimental to the overall plot, but if you're one of those people who loves to get into the weeds of every detail, you'll find this lacking in certain spots. Now for the series, because of how dense the content is and how twisty the story becomes, I think this is better binged in chunks or all together rather than watching episodically from week to week. And at first, I thought this might be a limited series with how the story appeared to be wrapping up. But while a ton of answers and solutions have been given by the time we get to the finale, many more avenues are opened up to continue us on into a second season without making it feel like we were cheated on this season. I love how this story comes together, and it's not for the impatient unless you want to binge the entire thing at once. It's very elaborate in all the complexities, but not so convoluted that it's incomprehensible. This unveils with an intensity and an urgency of a nail-biting thriller, while also obscuring elements in ways that make it a mind-bending mystery. Noomi Rapace is exquisite at effectively showcasing the confusion and uncertainty of an unreliable narrator while also maintaining rational sensibilities and a sympathetic persona. Supporting Rapace, but not in lesser stature, Jonathan Banks, Rosie Coleman, Davina Coleman, and James Darcy shine by delivering performances wrapped in sadness, confusion, hubris, and hope. Also, some story choppiness can be felt thanks to the interspersing of present and past occurrences, mixing time periods seamlessly. Each episode contains enough intrigue to captivate and entertain, but for a truly satisfying watching experience, binging in chunks is recommended. And while this season does deliver on providing answers to many of its questions, more stories left to pursue, leaving us with the parting image that's hauntingly mysterious. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and then some violence with gruesome imagery. I give Constellation 4.5 out of 5 couches. So if there have been any series or films lately that have just melted your brain in a good way, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.